My next guest, Lee Asher, is one of the most inspirational people I've ever come across. He founded the Asher House, an animal sanctuary, which on Instagram, over 1 million people are currently following Lee on his journey, rescuing and rehabilitating animals that have been abused and abandoned, giving them a permanent home to live out their lives. Here to tell his story is the one and only Lee Asher. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you deeply for having me. It means a lot. Thank you.
So let's start with not who you are now, but how you became who you are. Tell me about your childhood, where you're from, what that was like for you growing up.
Wow. I actually grew up in Florida, which I just found out you're there now. So I grew up in Florida.
Yeah.
Like many people, which is important to recognize, I had a very unique childhood. I grew up with severe learning disabilities. So in school, I had to be separated from all the cool kids and pretty much everyone who had groups of friends and cliques and athletes. I grew up with severe learning disabilities, ADD and ADHD and all these things. And I spent most of my time, the majority of my time, either alone or with animals. I didn't have many friends or many people to go to for really anything, and I always wanted to fit in. It's not that I didn't care. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be part of a group. I wanted friends, but I never felt not only welcomed, even if I was welcomed, I didn't feel comfortable. I felt just the most at peace if I was either alone or with animals. And not to fast forward, but by learning that, that's kind of how my journey started. You know, I really accepted the fact at a young age that I was different, and I stopped trying to fit in, which brought me a lot of happiness by just being comfortable to accept the fact that I was very different, you know? And I started going to animal shelters as often as I could. I would even run away from school sometimes. There was an animal shelter about a mile down the road from where I went to school, and I would go there during lunch and breaks. I would go there all of the time. They thought I was, luckily I've always been very tall for my age. I always looked older, so they thought I was, an adult, but I was quite young. And I would go and I would just sit with the animals, and I used to bring them food from my cafeteria and treats. And yeah, it was just different. I can't explain it. I look back at my childhood often now. Like, I always look back at that little boy, and it's interesting that I don't feel I'm much different now. Besides, the insecurity aspect, I was, of course, very, very insecure. Pretty much throughout my entire, even up until my young adult life, until my mid-20s, very, very insecure, very lost. I never understood what I was doing here. And a lot of the questions I asked myself as a little boy, as just a kid, I still ask myself today. It's interesting. I'm doing what I always envisioned I would do, but my mindset isn't much different.
Right. So did your parents get you a pet of your own, or you had to go and volunteer to go see other animals?
It was really sad because I had a pet, and I became allergic to dogs, and allergic to anything with fur. I had severe allergies. I was always sick as well. And looking back at it, it was definitely because of stress. My parents were always screaming at each other. They were very, very loud and very negative about everything. And it was, they're still alive. So I always feel a little bit of guilt when I talk about it. But it was just a really just an unfortunate way for a child to view a relationship, which really messed me up until honestly recently, thinking of what a relationship should look like and sound like. And it was just awful. So looking back at why I was always sick, and I had like severe scoliosis. When I would go to school, I had to wear this huge back brace. So imagine being a kid with learning disabilities with a back brace, tall, can't defend himself. So like, I was just this tool to get bullied. And I finally had a dog, and it was like the most amazing thing. And then they took the dog away from me because I became allergic. I was allergic to everything. I mean, you name it, you name it, and I was allergic to it. Like I remember begging for a rabbit, and I couldn't have the rabbit. So eventually, by going, as I mentioned earlier, I would go to these animals, and I got to tell you, I kind of feel a little bit guilty because I'm acting like I had it so terrible, but everything that I went through, without a doubt, has shaped me to what I'm able to do now, and to have the compassion I have for not just animals but people.
Yeah.
So as I talk about my childhood, I want you to know that I really don't regret a thing, and I also know, not regret, I wouldn't change a thing, excuse me, but I also know that my parents, understanding who they are now, really did the best that they could at the time. They really were doing their best, and in their minds, were the best parents in the world. So I just want to say that. But by ignoring the fact that I was allergic to dogs and going to the animal shelters, I think that I built a strong enough immune system to where I wasn't allergic anymore. And eventually I was able to get a dog. Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I think what you said was so important because so many people look back on their lives and they have a lot of regrets or guilt or shame, or they feel really bad about their childhood and want to change it so much. But I think it's so important for people to realize that that shapes who you are. And unless you have lows or things to, compare to what's good, you don't know the difference. Like there's such a pendulum. You have to be able to feel, the negative to be able to feel the positive. And it's such a great thing for people to realize that who you are is shaped by where you came from.
You bring up a beautiful point. I have this, I go to therapy and I really invest in my mental health, and no one's ever been able to help me look at what I'm about to tell you in a positive light. Up until a couple of days ago, I have a personal trainer, and he said to me, he was making a joke. He said, my mother-in-law follows you on Instagram. She asked me if you were single. So I said, he asked me like if that happens a lot and stuff like that. And I said, it's interesting. People get this image of me on social media, but they don't know how toxic it is to date me. How toxic it is. And he said, he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, you're the nicest guy I've ever met. I love training you. If I had a daughter, he has a son. If I had a daughter, I don't think I could want her to date anyone else but you.
Uh-huh.
And I said, his name is Rod. I said, Rod, sometimes I could be in the room with someone and I think about something negative and I create like nothing at all happens, but all of a sudden I become completely cold and shut off. And I said, I could be at a restaurant and I could hear someone speaking badly about someone, and you would think that they were talking to me. I said, I take on everyone's energy and I become this toxic person. And of course, since nothing happened, the person in the room thinks that they did something wrong. And the more they push to try to figure out what they did wrong, the more upset and closed off I get. And I said, it's such a terrible trait that, I feel so bad for the people in my life.